We were the couple everyone envied, yet I was the only one who didn't know the truth. My name is David Carter, and 3 weeks ago I thought I had the perfect marriage. Sarah and I had been together for 10 years, married for 8 of them. We lived in our dream house in suburban Connecticut, white picket fence, manicured lawn, the whole American dream package. I was a successful marketing executive. She was a talented freelance graphic designer working from our converted home office. But perfect marriages don't exist, do they? I learned that the hard way. It started with something so small, so insignificant that I almost dismissed it entirely. Sarah had always been particular about her phone. Not secretive, just careful. She'd place it face down during dinner, keep it in her purse when we watched movies together. I never thought much of it. We all have our little habits, right? Then came that Tuesday evening in late September. I'd gotten home early from a client meeting that wrapped up ahead of schedule. The house felt different somehow, charged with an energy I couldn't place. Sarah was in the kitchen, her back to me, as she prepared dinner. But something was off. Her shoulders were tense, her movements slightly too deliberate, like someone trying very hard to appear normal. "Hey, beautiful," I said, wrapping my arms around her waist from behind. She jumped. Actually jumped like I'd startled her out of deep thought. "Oh, David, you're early." Her laugh was just a beat too late, a semitone too high. "How was your day?" We went through the motions of our usual evening routine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was performing rather than living. During dinner, her phone buzzed against the table. Her eyes darted to it immediately, hungrily, before she caught herself and turned it face down again. "Work stuff," she said, with a dismissive wave. "Client emergency." Here's the thing about being married to someone for 8 years. You develop an internal radar for their tells. Sarah's client emergency voice was different from her genuine concern voice. This was the tone she used when she was crafting a story, testing how it sounded out loud. That night, I lay awake listening to her breathe beside me, analyzing every interaction we'd had over the past few weeks. The late-night work sessions, the new attention to her appearance, subtle makeup when she used to work bare-faced at home clothes that looked effortlessly casual, but I knew took careful planning. The way she'd started taking phone calls in the other room, claiming clients preferred privacy for sensitive projects. I'm not a paranoid man by nature. If anything, Emma always said I was too trusting, too willing to give people the benefit of the doubt. But lying there in the dark, pieces began clicking together like a puzzle I didn't want to solve. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of going directly to the office, I drove to a coffee shop 3 blocks away and called in sick. Then I went home and parked at the end of our street where I could see our house but remain hidden behind the miller's oversized SUV. At 10:47 a.m., Sarah emerged from our front door. She was dressed in what I recognized as her important client meeting outfit. The navy blazer that accentuated her figure, the heels that made her legs look impossibly long, makeup applied with the precision of someone expecting to be seen. She checked her reflection in her car window before getting in a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times but never really noticed. I followed her. God, I actually followed my own wife like some kind of private investigator. The shame of that moment still burns in my chest, but not as much as what I discovered next. She didn't go to a coffee shop for a client meeting. She didn't go to any of the places where a legitimate business meeting might occur. Instead, she drove downtown to the financial district and parked outside a gleaming office building I'd never seen before. She sat in her car for exactly 7 minutes. I watched the clock on my dashboard before a man emerged from the building's lobby. Even from a distance, I could see he was younger than me, probably late 20s, with the kind of confident swagger that screamed entitlement. He wore an expensive suit that fit too perfectly to be off the rack, and when he smiled at Sarah through her windshield, I felt something cold and sharp twist in my stomach. Marcus Whitman. I didn't know his name yet, but I watched him slide into the passenger seat of my wife's car like he belonged there. I watched them drive away together, and I followed them to the Marriott downtown, the same luxury hotel where Sarah and I had celebrated our 3rd anniversary. They disappeared into that hotel for 2 hours and 37 minutes. I know because I sat in the parking garage counting every second, trying to convince myself there was some innocent explanation for what I was witnessing. Maybe he was a client with an unusual meeting space preference. Maybe they were planning a surprise party. Maybe. When they emerged, everything about their body language screamed intimacy. The way he touched the small of her back as they walked. The way she looked up at him with an expression I recognized. It was the same way she used to look at me during our dating years, like he was the most fascinating person she'd ever encountered. I drove home in a daze and was sitting at my kitchen table when Sarah returned at 4:30 p.m. carrying takeout Thai food and wearing the satisfied smile of someone who'd had an excellent day. "How was work?" I asked, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "Productive meeting with a new client," she said, not meeting my eyes as she unpacked pad thai and spring rolls. "Really challenging project, but I think we made good progress." That night, I waited until she was asleep before checking her phone. I'm not proud of this invasion of privacy, but desperation makes you do things you never thought you would. Her passcode was still the same, our anniversary date. The irony wasn't lost on me. Most of her messages were perfectly innocent. Work conversations, plans with friends, mundane daily communications. But then I found a thread that made my blood turn to ice water. The contact was saved simply as M. No last name, no identifying information. The messages were careful coded, but unmistakably intimate. "Can't wait for our next project review. That presentation was incredible. You're so talented at everything. Next Tuesday, same conference room, I have some new ideas I'd love to run by you." I scrolled up through weeks of messages, watching my marriage dissolve in real time. They'd been careful, clever, even maintaining the pretense of a professional relationship while conducting what was clearly a passionate affair. But in their arrogance, they'd grown sloppy. Recent messages were less coded, more direct. "I can't stop thinking about this afternoon. David's working late again. Perfect timing. You make me feel alive in ways I'd forgotten were possible." That last message was from Sarah. Sarah, who told me every day that she loved me. Sarah, who made coffee exactly the way I liked it every morning. Sarah, who was lying next to me right now, probably dreaming about another man. I set her phone back exactly where I'd found it and stared at the ceiling until dawn. Tomorrow, I decided I would call my sister Emma. Emma, the divorce attorney who'd always harbored suspicions about Sarah's character. Emma, who would help me figure out what to do next. But first, I needed to learn everything I could about the man who was destroying my marriage. I needed to know exactly who Marcus Whitman was, where he lived, what he had to lose. Because if Sarah thought she could play this game without consequences, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. The perfect marriage was over. Now it was time to plan the perfect response. I called Emma at 6:30 a.m. before Sarah was awake. My sister has always been an early riser, a habit from her law school days that served her well in her divorce practice. She answered on the second ring, immediately alert despite the hour. "David, what's wrong?" Emma has this uncanny ability to read trouble in people's voices. Maybe it comes from years of dealing with betrayed spouses, or maybe it's just the intuition of someone who's seen enough human wreckage to recognize the warning signs. Either way, she knew. "I need to see you. Today. Before work." My voice cracked slightly on the last word. Even admitting I needed help felt like acknowledging that my perfect life was crumbling. "My office, 7:30. I'll have coffee ready." Emma's office in downtown Hartford reflects her personality. Sharp, organized, efficient. Legal books lined the walls like soldiers at attention, and her desk was arranged with military precision. When I arrived, she took one look at my face and locked the door behind me. "Tell me everything," she said, pouring coffee from a French press that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. So I did. Every detail from the past 24 hours spilled out of me like water from a broken dam. The suspicious behavior, the surveillance, the hotel, the text messages. Emma listened without interruption, taking notes in her precise handwriting, occasionally nodding in recognition of patterns she'd seen before. When I finished, she sat back in her leather chair and studied me with the same analytical gaze she probably used on hostile witnesses. "First question," she said. "Do you want to save the marriage or end it?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Until that moment, I hadn't fully processed that those were my only two options. There was no going back to ignorant bliss, no pretending I hadn't seen what I'd seen. "I don't know," I admitted. "Yesterday morning, if you'd asked me, I would have said Sarah and I would be together forever. Now you're discovering that the woman you married might not exist," Emma finished. "The Sarah who makes your coffee and says she loves you versus the Sarah who's having hotel rendezvous with another man. Which one is real?" It was a question I couldn't answer yet, but Emma's legal mind was already moving to practical matters. "Here's what we're going to do," she said, pulling out a legal pad. "Before you make any decisions about confrontation or divorce, we need a complete picture. That means identifying this Marcus character, understanding the full scope of the affair, and documenting everything." She handed me a business card for a private investigator named Jake Morrison. "He's discreet, thorough, and his evidence holds up in court. But David, I want you to think carefully about this next step. Once you hire Jake, there's no pretending you don't know what you discover. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about Sarah sleeping peacefully in our bed while texting another man about how alive he made her feel. Yes. The rest of the morning felt surreal. I went to work, sat through meetings, responded to emails, all while feeling like I was watching someone else's life. During lunch, I called Jake Morrison from my office with the door locked. Jake had been investigating infidelity cases for 15 years, and it showed in his straightforward, businesslike approach. No judgment, no sympathy, just professional efficiency. I gave him Marcus's physical description, the office building location, the license plate number I'd memorized from Sarah's car, and the hotel details. "I'll have preliminary information by tomorrow afternoon," he said. "Full report within a week. And Mr. Carter, try to act normal at home. The last thing we want is to spook them before we have everything documented." Acting normal proved nearly impossible. That evening, Sarah was chattier than usual, almost manic in her enthusiasm about a breakthrough with the new client project. She cooked my favorite dinner, wore a dress I'd bought her for her birthday, even suggested we watch the Netflix series we'd been meaning to start together. It was a performance, I realized. She was overcompensating, trying to smooth over whatever guilt was nagging at her conscience by being the perfect wife. The irony was suffocating. She was working harder to maintain our marriage facade than she had to maintain our actual marriage in months. "You seem distracted," she said during the opening credits of our show. "Tough day at work." "Just a challenging client situation," I replied, using her own deflection strategy. "Nothing I can't handle." She curled up against me on the couch, and for a moment, I almost convinced myself this was real. That the woman resting her head on my shoulder was the same one who'd promised to love me through better or worse. But then, her phone buzzed, and I felt her tense against me, her attention immediately divided. The next afternoon, Jake called with his preliminary findings. Marcus Whitman, 29, owned a mid-sized marketing consulting firm called Whitman Strategic Solutions. Married to Jennifer Whitman, 27, with 2 children, ages 3 and 5. They lived in an upscale subdivision about 20 minutes from our house, in a colonial with a mortgage that suggested Marcus was doing well financially but wasn't wealthy enough to weather a major scandal. "Gets interesting, though," Jake continued. "This isn't his first rodeo. I found evidence of at least 2 other affairs in the past 3 years. Guy's got a pattern. always targets freelancers or consultants he can claim as business relationships. Your wife isn't special to him, Mr. Carter. She's just convenient. That information hit me harder than I'd expected. Part of me had been holding on to some romantic notion that Sarah had been swept away by an epic love affair, that maybe she'd found something with Marcus that I couldn't provide. Learning that she was just another conquest in his predictable pattern felt like a different kind of betrayal. "There's more," Jake said. "They're not just meeting at the Marriott. I've got photos from 3 different locations over the past week. Coffee shops, her car in various parking lots, and—" He paused. "Mr. Carter, they were in your house yesterday, Wednesday afternoon when you were at work. I've got time-stamped photos of his car in your driveway." My home office, my house, our bed. The violation felt complete. That night, I stood in my kitchen making dinner and tried to process the magnitude of what I'd learned. Sarah wasn't just having an affair. She was bringing her lover into our home, into the space we'd built together. Every surface in our house was now contaminated with the knowledge of what had happened there. "David," Sarah's voice behind me made me jump. "You're gripping that knife pretty tightly." I looked down to see my knuckles white around the handle of the chef's knife I'd been using to chop vegetables. For a split second, I understood how betrayal could drive people to violence. The rage was a living thing in my chest, demanding action, demanding justice. But I'm not a violent man, and Emma's voice echoed in my head. "Document everything, stay in control. Make strategic decisions, not emotional ones." "Sorry," I said, setting the knife down carefully. "Just thinking about work stuff." "Maybe we should take a weekend trip soon," Sarah suggested, wrapping her arms around me from behind the same way I'd done to her just days earlier. "Get away from work stress. Remember how to just be together." The audacity was breathtaking. She was planning romantic getaways with me while conducting an affair that included bringing her lover into our home. I wondered if she'd suggested the same weekend escapes to Marcus, if she was running the same manipulation playbook on both of us. "That sounds nice," I managed to say. "Let me check my calendar." But even as I played along with her charade, my mind was working on a different kind of calendar. Jake would have his full report within days. Emma was researching Connecticut's adultery laws and their impact on divorce proceedings. And I was formulating a plan that would give me every advantage when it came time for the confrontation that was now inevitable. Sarah thought she was playing chess while I played checkers. She had no idea I'd been studying the board this whole time, and I was about to make a move that would end the game entirely. Tomorrow, I would start phase 2 of my investigation. Tomorrow, I would begin gathering the evidence that would ensure Marcus Whitman lost everything he thought he was safe from losing. And tomorrow, I would start planning the conversation that would begin with a simple question: do you love him? But tonight, I had to survive one more evening of pretending that my marriage wasn't already over. Session 3. The confrontation she never saw coming by. Friday morning. I had everything I needed. Jake's full report sat in a manila envelope in my office desk drawer, like a loaded weapon waiting to be fired. 43 pages of photographs, financial records, timeline documentation, and background information that painted a picture of betrayal so comprehensive it left no room for denial or manipulation. Marcus Whitman wasn't just cheating on his wife. He was systematically destroying multiple families while building his business on a foundation of lies. Jake had uncovered evidence of his affair with a freelance photographer 2 years ago, a social media consultant last year, and now Sarah. Each relationship followed the same pattern: professional meetings that gradually became personal hotel encounters disguised as business lunches, and eventually violation of the women's homes and marriages. But Marcus had made a critical error this time. He'd chosen to target the wife of someone who had the resources and patience to fight back strategically. Emma had spent the week researching Connecticut's divorce laws and preparing what she called the nuclear option, a legal strategy that would protect my assets, expose both Sarah and Marcus professionally, and ensure that any divorce settlement would favor me heavily. The state's infidelity statutes were more favorable to wronged spouses than many people realized, especially when the affair involved what could be classified as criminal behavior, such as using someone's home for adultery without their knowledge. The beauty of this situation, Emma had explained over coffee that morning, is that they've handed you every advantage. Adultery in the marital home, financial deception, Sarah's been using joint account funds for her hotel meetings, and Marcus's business could be destroyed when his wife and clients learn about his pattern of behavior. But even with all the legal advantages, I knew the confrontation itself was the most crucial element. I needed Sarah to reveal the full scope of her betrayal voluntarily, to admit to things that might not be in Jake's report. Most importantly, I needed her to understand that her carefully constructed lies had been completely exposed. I chose Friday evening deliberately. Sarah had been particularly affectionate all week, clearly sensing that something was different about my mood, but misreading it as general stress rather than focused suspicion. She'd planned what she called a romantic evening at home. Candles, wine, her famous lasagna, the works. Another performance designed to reinforce the devoted wife image while she mentally prepared for another client meeting with Marcus the following Tuesday. The irony was perfect. She would use our romantic evening to build her alibi for next week's betrayal. I arrived home at exactly 6:15 p.m., 15 minutes later than usual, but early enough that Sarah hadn't started cooking yet. She was in the living room, having changed into the black dress I'd complimented her on during our anniversary dinner last year. Her makeup was flawless, her hair styled in loose waves that I knew took her at least an hour to achieve. "You look beautiful," I said, and meant it. Even knowing what I knew, even feeling the rage and heartbreak warring in my chest, Sarah was still breathtakingly beautiful. That's what made her betrayal so much worse. She had everything anyone could want, and she'd thrown it away for the thrill of deception. "I thought we deserved a special evening," she said, rising to kiss me. "It feels like we haven't really connected in weeks." Weeks? Try months, I thought. How long had she been planning this affair? How many of our special evenings had been her way of managing guilt while she conducted her double life? We moved through the motions of our romantic dinner like actors hitting their marks in a play we'd performed dozens of times before. Sarah was animated, funny, attentive, everything she'd been when we first fell in love. If I hadn't seen the evidence with my own eyes, I might have convinced myself that my suspicions were paranoia, that this version of my wife was the real one. But I had seen the evidence. I knew about Marcus Whitman, about the hotels, about Tuesday's planned encounter. And as Sarah launched into an elaborate story about a difficult client who was finally coming around to her creative vision, I realized she was actually talking about Marcus. She was describing their affair to my face while disguising it as work frustration. The audacity was stunning, and it gave me the perfect opening. "This client sounds like he's become very important to you," I said, refilling her wine glass. "What's his name again?" "You've mentioned him so often lately, but I don't think you've ever said his name." For just a split second, Sarah's composure flickered. Her smile remained perfect, but something shifted behind her eyes. A quick calculation, a moment of uncertainty. "Oh, it's Marcus," she said, the name sliding out, like she'd been waiting for permission to say it. "Marcus Wilson. He owns a consulting firm downtown." Wilson. Even in this moment, she couldn't resist one final lie. As if changing his last name would somehow protect them both if I ever decided to investigate. "Marcus Wilson." I repeated slowly, like I was trying to remember where I'd heard the name. "That sounds familiar. What kind of consulting does he do?" Sarah's confidence returned as she launched into a detailed description of Marcus's business. Details she could only know if she'd spent considerable time discussing his work with him. Professional details mixed with personal observations, admiration that went far beyond what any client relationship would justify. She was painting a picture of a man she clearly respected, admired, and cared about deeply. A man who had become central to her daily thoughts and emotional life. She was describing being in love, and she didn't even realize it. "He sounds like quite a guy," I said when she finished. "Very inspiring." "He is," Sarah agreed, her eyes lighting up in a way they hadn't when she looked at me in months. "He has this way of seeing possibilities that other people miss. He's helped me think about my work in completely new ways." "And your marriage," I thought. "Don't forget how he's helped you think about your marriage in new ways." I stood up from the table, walked to the kitchen counter where I'd left my phone, and returned to stand behind Sarah's chair. She turned to look up at me, still glowing with the after effects of talking about Marcus, still completely unaware that she'd just confessed to an emotional affair while denying a physical one. "Sarah," I said quietly, "I have a question for you." "Of course," she said, reaching up to touch my hand. "Anything." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything I'd discovered, everything I'd planned, everything that was about to change forever. This was the moment that would divide our life into before and after. This was the moment when I would stop being the trusting husband and become something else entirely. "When you got home tonight, you looked so happy, so satisfied," I said, watching her face carefully. "Like you'd had the most amazing day. And listening to you talk about Marcus Wilson, I can see how much he means to you." Sarah's smile was still in place, but I could see confusion beginning to cloud her eyes. She sensed the shift in my tone, but couldn't quite identify the danger yet. "So I need to know," I continued, my voice steady, despite the hammering of my heart. "Do you love him?" The question hung in the air between us like a blade. Sarah's face went through a series of micro-expressions. Confusion, calculation, the beginning of panic, before settling into what she probably thought was innocent bewilderment. "David, what are you talking about? He's a client. I barely know him personally." But I wasn't finished. I leaned down slightly, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper, and spoke the words that would shatter her world completely. "Do you love him, Sarah? Do you love Marcus Whitman?" The color drained from her face so quickly, I thought she might faint. Her mouth opened slightly, closed, opened again. Her hand, which had been resting on mine, began to tremble. She froze completely, her eyes wide, with the terrible realization that her carefully constructed lies had just collapsed around her. I knew his real name, which meant I knew everything else. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. And in that silence, Sarah finally understood that the game was over. The silence that followed my question seemed to last forever, though it was probably only 30 seconds. Sarah sat frozen in her chair, her face cycling through expressions like a slot machine: denial, calculation, fear, and finally a desperate attempt to regain control. "David, I don't know what you think you know, but I know that Marcus Whitman owns Whitman Strategic Solutions, not Wilson Consulting," I said, walking around to face her directly. "I know he's 29 years old, married to Jennifer, with 2 children. I know his office is in the Hartwell building downtown, and I know you've been meeting him at the Marriott Hotel every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 6 weeks." With each fact I revealed, Sarah seemed to shrink further into herself. But I could see her lawyer's daughter instincts kicking in, the same analytical mind that had attracted me to her in the first place, now working frantically to find an escape route from this conversation. "You've been following me," she said, her voice stronger now, indignant. "David, that's insane. That's not normal behavior in a marriage." "You're right," I agreed, pulling out the chair across from her and sitting down. "Normal marriages don't require surveillance. Normal marriages don't involve lies about client meetings that are actually hotel encounters. Normal marriages don't involve bringing your lover into our home while your husband is at work." That last detail hit her like a physical blow. Her carefully maintained composure cracked completely, and for the first time since I'd known her, Sarah looked genuinely afraid. "I don't know what you think you saw, but—" Wednesday afternoon. I interrupted, pulling out my phone and opening the photo Jake had sent me. 2:37 p.m., Marcus's BMW in our driveway. Would you like to see the timestamp? I showed her the screen, watching her face as she recognized not just Marcus's car, but the distinctive crack in our driveway concrete visible in the background. There was no denying the location, no explaining away the timeline. "We were working," she whispered, but even she didn't sound convinced anymore. "In our bedroom?" I asked quietly. "Because I had Jake dust for prints yesterday while you were at your yoga class. Interesting what modern forensics can tell you about recent activity in your own home." This was a bluff. I hadn't actually had our bedroom dusted for prints, but Sarah's horrified expression told me everything I needed to know. She believed it was possible, which meant it was true. "David, please let me explain." "I'm going to show you something," I said, reaching into my jacket pocket and pulling out a thick manila envelope. "And then you're going to have exactly one opportunity to tell me the complete truth. Not your version, not a sanitized story designed to minimize damage. The truth." I opened the envelope and spread Jake's photographs across our dining room table like a tarot reading of our marriage's death. Sarah and Marcus entering the Marriott. Sarah and Marcus in coffee shops, their body language intimate and familiar. Marcus's car at our house on multiple occasions. Sarah checking her reflection in storefront windows before meeting him, the same preening gesture I'd caught her making that first morning I'd followed her. But the most devastating photo was the last one, Sarah and Marcus kissing in the parking garage of his office building. Her hand tangled in his hair, her body pressed against him with an abandon I recognized from our early dating years. "This was taken yesterday," I said, watching her stare at the image in horror. 45 minutes before you came home and told me about your productive meeting with the new client." Sarah's breath was coming in short gasps now, and tears had started flowing down her cheeks. But I wasn't finished. Emma had coached me on this moment. The importance of getting a complete confession before Sarah had time to construct a new set of lies. The text messages. I continued pulling out printed screenshots. 6 months of them. Should I read some of my favorites out loud? "You make me feel alive in ways I'd forgotten were possible. I can't stop thinking about this afternoon. David's working late again. Perfect timing. Stop," Sarah whispered. "Please stop. Next Tuesday, same conference room. I have some new ideas I'd love to run by you." I continued reading. "Very professional correspondence, Sarah. I'm sure Marcus's wife, Jennifer, would be fascinated to see his business communication style." At the mention of Marcus's wife, Sarah's head snapped up, fresh terror in her eyes. "You wouldn't." "Not yet," I said. "But Jennifer Whitman deserves to know what kind of man she's married to, don't you think? Just like I deserve to know what kind of woman I'm married to." Sarah was crying openly now. But they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of panic, of someone watching their carefully constructed double life collapse in real time. "David, I can explain everything. It's not what it looks like. I mean, it is. But it's not. I never meant for this to happen. I love you. I've always loved you." "But you love him too," I said. It wasn't a question. The silence stretched between us again, and when Sarah finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Yes." That single word hit harder than I'd expected, even though I'd known it was coming. Hearing her admit it, seeing the truth finally exposed after months of lies and manipulation, was like watching someone die. "How long?" I asked. "The affair started 4 months ago, but the feelings, maybe 6 months, in our home." 3 times, she whispered. "I'm so sorry, David. I know how that sounds, how horrible it is, but I was confused and—" "Are you leaving me for him?" This question seemed to surprise her, as if she hadn't actually considered the logical endpoint of her choices. No, I don't know. I wasn't thinking that far ahead. I was happy. For the first time in years, I felt excited about something. Marcus makes me feel like the woman I used to be before we got married, before life became so routine and predictable. Before we got married, there it was. The admission that our entire marriage had been something she'd simply endured rather than chosen. 8 years of what I'd thought was love had actually been Sarah slowly suffocating under the weight of commitment she'd never really wanted. So, what was the plan? I asked. Keep both of us indefinitely. See how long you could manage a double life without getting caught. There was no plan. Sarah exploded her guilt, morphing into defensiveness. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I was just trying to figure out what I wanted. Marriage is hard, David. It's not all romance and passion like it was when we were dating. Sometimes people need something more. Something more, I repeated. Like bringing your lover into our bed while I'm working to pay for the house where you're betraying me. That's not fair. Fair. I stood up the manila envelope falling to the floor, photographs scattering like evidence at a crime scene. You want to talk about fair would have been telling me you were unhappy instead of lying to me for 6 months. Fair would have been asking for a divorce instead of making me feel crazy for noticing that my wife was acting like a stranger. Fair would have been literally anything other than what you've done to our marriage, to our home, to me. Sarah was sobbing now, her perfectly applied makeup running down her face in dark streams. But even in her breakdown, I could see her calculating, trying to find an angle that would let her salvage something from this disaster. What are you going to do? She asked finally. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized that the woman I'd fallen in love with 10 years ago no longer existed. Maybe she'd never existed at all. Maybe I'd been in love with a performance, a carefully crafted version of Sarah, designed to get what she wanted. Marriage security, the freedom to have affairs while maintaining the respectability of being someone's wife. I'm going to call Emma, I said, and then I'm going to call Jennifer Whitman. She has a right to know what her husband has been doing, just like I had a right to know what my wife has been doing. David, please. And then I continued, you're going to pack a bag and leave this house tonight, because I can't stand to look at you for another second, and I can't sleep in a bed that you've shared with another man. Sarah's sobs intensified, but I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity, no lingering love, just a cold, clean clarity about what needed to happen next. The confrontation was over. Now came the part where I rebuilt my life from the wreckage of Sarah's choices. The next morning, I sat in Emma's office watching Sarah's world systematically collapse through a series of phone calls that would destroy everything she thought she'd built for herself. My sister had arrived at the office at 6 a.m. to begin what she called the cleanup operation, a methodical dismantling of both Sarah's life and Marcus Whitman's carefully constructed facade. First call goes to Jennifer Whitman. Emma explained, her phone already dialing. She deserves to know before Sarah or Marcus can spin this story. I listened as Emma, using her most professional attorney voice, explained to Marcus's wife that her husband had been conducting an affair with a married client, that there was extensive photographic evidence, and that Jennifer might want to consider her legal options. The conversation was brief, clinical, devastating. She's filing for divorce Monday morning, Emma reported after hanging up. And she's requesting full custody of the children based on Marcus's pattern of adultery and poor judgment. Turns out this isn't news to her. She's suspected for months but didn't have proof. The second call was to Marcus's business partner, a man named Robert Chen, who owned 40% of Whitman's Strategic Solutions. Emma had done her research. The partnership agreement included a morality clause that could be triggered by behavior that damaged the company's reputation. Mr. Chen, this is Emma Carter, attorney with Carter & Associates. I'm calling regarding your business partner Marcus Whitman and some recent activities that may impact your company's standing with clients. Within 10 minutes, Marcus Whitman had lost his business partnership, his access to company accounts, and his professional reputation. Robert Chen was already drafting termination papers and planning to inform their client base that Marcus was no longer associated with the firm. But Emma wasn't finished. The third call was to Sarah's largest client, a marketing firm that provided 60% of her freelance income. Emma carefully explained that there might be some disruption to their projects due to personal complications in Sarah's life, and that they might want to consider alternative design resources for ongoing work. Professional reputation is everything in freelance work, Emma explained to me as she made similar calls to Sarah's other major clients. Once word gets out that someone is involved in a messy affair that's affecting their judgment and reliability, clients disappear fast. They can't afford to be associated with that kind of drama. By noon, Sarah had lost 3 major clients, and her professional network was buzzing with carefully worded warnings about her personal issues affecting her work quality. In the freelance world, reputation damage spreads faster than wildfire. But the masterpiece of Emma's strategy was still to come. "Now we call Sarah," she said, dialing my wife's cell phone. "She's been staying at her sister's house, probably thinking she has time to figure out damage control." Sarah answered on the first ring, her voice hoarse from crying. "Emma, why are you calling me?" "Because David asked me to update you on the legal situation," Emma said smoothly. "I wanted you to understand exactly what's happening so you can make informed decisions about your next steps." Emma proceeded to methodically explain Connecticut's divorce laws, how adultery affected asset division, and how Sarah's use of marital funds for hotel meetings constituted financial infidelity. She described the strength of our evidence, the testimonies we could compel, and the likelihood that Sarah would leave the marriage with minimal assets and maximum public humiliation. "But here's the thing, Sarah," Emma continued, her voice taking on the tone of a predator circling wounded prey. "All of that assumes you want to fight this in court. You could choose to make this easy on everyone by agreeing to David's terms for an uncontested divorce." "What terms?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "You keep your car, your personal belongings, and $10,000 cash. David keeps the house, the joint savings, the investment accounts, and his pension. You waive all claims to spousal support. And most importantly, you sign a non-disclosure agreement preventing you from discussing the marriage or divorce publicly." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. That's everything," Sarah finally said. "That's our entire life." "No," Emma corrected. "That was David's entire life which you chose to destroy. This is just David taking back what was always his. I need to think about it." "You have until Monday morning," Emma said. "After that, we file contested divorce papers and begin discovery proceedings, which means depositions, financial audits, and very public court hearings where all of this evidence becomes part of the public record. Your choice." Emma hung up and turned to me with a satisfied smile. "She'll sign," she said confidently. "Sarah's many things, but she's not stupid. She knows a losing battle when she sees one." That afternoon brought news that Marcus Whitman's destruction was proceeding even faster than Sarah's. His wife, Jennifer, had wasted no time in filing for divorce and immediately leaked the story to their social circle. Marcus's gym membership was cancelled, his country club membership was under review, and his children's private school had asked him to find alternative arrangements for pickup and drop-off to avoid disrupting the school community. But the most satisfying update came Sunday evening. Jake Morrison called with news that Marcus had been arrested Friday night for drunk and disorderly conduct outside Sarah's sister's house, apparently attempting to convince Sarah to run away with him. The arrest made the local police blotter, which was picked up by the neighborhood social media groups where Marcus and Jennifer were well-known figures. "Guys completely lost it," Jake reported. "Turns out he really thought Sarah was going to leave her marriage and they'd ride off into the sunset together. When she told him about the divorce terms and that she couldn't afford to fight it, he became convinced that if they just disappeared together, they could start over somewhere else. And Sarah refused to see him, had her sister call the police. Seems like reality is hitting her hard. She's about to lose everything, and her knight in shining armor turned out to be a delusional drunk who thinks love conquers financial ruin. Monday morning, Sarah signed the divorce papers without modification. Emma met her at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown, ironically just 3 blocks from the hotel where Sarah had conducted her affair. Sarah looked like she'd aged 5 years in a week. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes wrinkled, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. She didn't even read the papers thoroughly, Emma told me afterward. Just signed everything and asked when she could get her belongings from the house. What did you tell her? That movers would pack her personal items Wednesday morning and deliver them to whatever address she provided, and that you never wanted to see her again. By Thursday, Sarah Carter had ceased to exist in my life completely. The woman who had shared my bed for 8 years, who had promised to love me in sickness and in health, who had made coffee exactly the way I liked it every morning for a decade, was gone as if she'd never existed at all. Marcus Whitman fared even worse. His business dissolved. His marriage ended with Jennifer receiving full custody and substantial support, and his reputation in Connecticut's business community was permanently destroyed. He eventually moved to Florida, where he took a job as a mid-level sales representative for a company that didn't bother to check his references too carefully. Sarah moved in with her sister temporarily, then disappeared entirely from our social circle. I heard through mutual friends that she'd relocated to Portland, Oregon, where she was working as a barista while trying to rebuild her design career under a slightly modified name. Apparently, the internet made it difficult to completely escape your past, and potential clients had a habit of Googling freelancers before hiring them. 6 months later, I was sitting in my home office, the same room where Sarah had conducted phone calls with Marcus while I worked late to pay our mortgage, when Emma stopped by with a bottle of champagne. "Congratulations," she said, setting the bottle on my desk. "Your divorce is officially final as of today." "How do you feel?" she asked, studying my face with the same analytical expression she'd worn throughout this entire ordeal. I looked around the room that had once been contaminated with betrayal and lies, but now felt clean again. My space, my rules, my future. "Free," I said, and meant it completely. The perfect marriage had been a lie, but the perfect revenge had been absolutely real. And unlike Sarah's short-lived affair with Marcus Whitman, the satisfaction of reclaiming my life was going to last forever. Some people say that living well is the best revenge. They're wrong. The best revenge is making sure that the people who destroy your life lose everything they thought they were safe from losing, while you emerge stronger than you were before they tried to break you. Sarah had wanted excitement, passion, the thrill of the forbidden. Instead, she got poverty, isolation, and the knowledge that her moment of selfish pleasure had cost her literally everything that mattered. Marcus had wanted a consequence-free affair with a married woman who would never threaten his comfortable family life. Instead, he got public humiliation, financial ruin, and the loss of his children. And me, I got my life back along with the satisfaction of knowing that justice, when properly planned and expertly executed, is the sweetest feeling in the world. The perfect marriage was over. The perfect revenge was complete. And David Carter was finally free to build something real with someone who deserved it.